I'm Dr. Mark Lewis, the Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute, and welcome to Emerging Tech Horizons. On today's podcast, we're joined by not one, but two experts who will be talking to us about government contracting. And they're Dr. Jerry McGinn and Eric Lofgren. Jerry is the Executive Director of the Center for Government Contracting in the School of Business at George Mason University. The center is currently conducting over $3 million in research for the Department of Defense, other sponsors, and has published influential white papers and commentary pieces. It's held events on topics such as DOD budget reform, intellectual property policy, industrial-based resilience, and defense acquisition best practices. Jerry is a trusted strategic advisor. He's sought after for his expertise in U.S. industrial policy, supply chain, Defense Production Act, industrial security, export control, foreign military sales, industrial-based policies. And he currently serves in the Economic Security Subcommittee of the Homeland Security Advisory Council. Prior to joining George Mason University, Jerry served as a senior career official in the Office of Manufacturing and Industrial-Based Policy in the Department of Defense, where he led efforts to analyze the capabilities and overall health of defense industrial base, including the presidentially directed 2017-2018 interagency review of the manufacturing defense industrial base and DPA activities. He also directed hundreds of reviews of high-profile mergers and acquisitions, as well as transactions before the Committee on Foreign Investment. Dr. McGinn was commissioned to the U.S. Army. He served with distinction as an infantry officer and is a graduate of Ranger and Airborne schools, has received numerous civilian and military awards, earned a PhD, Master of Science, and Master of Arts from Georgetown University, as well as a Bachelor of Science from the United States Military Academy at West Point. Also joining us, as I mentioned, is Eric Lofgren. Eric is a research fellow at the Center for Government Contracting within the School of Business at George Mason University. And at the Center for Government Contracting performs research, writes, leads initiatives on business, policy, regulatory, and other issues in government contracting. Prior to joining George Mason, Eric was a senior analyst at Technomics Incorporated. He supported the Defense Department's Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Office, CAPE, which many of us know well. He's also supported government analyses for the Government Accountability Office, NAVC, the Canada Public Works, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Cost and Economics. Eric is an expert in cost estimation and defense contract business data. He's won 5 Best Paper Awards at the International Cost Estimating and Analysis Association, including Best Paper overall. And during his time at George Mason, he's written multiple reports on federal contracting data and policies related to the COVID-19 response. He's also done a Naval Postgraduate School symposium paper on acquisition reform and has a book manuscript on the history of weapon systems acquisition. So, Jerry and Eric, first, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm wondering if we could start off, could you both share a little bit about your backgrounds and how you came to your current roles? And Jerry, maybe you start, and then Eric, you fill in.
Yeah, no, thanks. Mark, it's great to be with you, and love what you're doing with your emerging tech organization at NDIA. Yeah, so I, as you kindly kind of outlined, so my career, I basically can't keep a job. I've been in and around national security, in government, in industry, and now for the first time in academia. And I didn't intend to come here. What happened was I was leaving government. I was an SCS in what's now Acquisition and Sustainment Office Industrial-Based Policy. And I was looking, I thought I'd go back to consulting, but George Mason decided, hey, listen, we want to actually build a university center focused around the business of government, focused around the business policy, regulatory issues facing government and industry. And it's always bemused me that there hasn't been a real focus of that. I mean, some of the think tanks dabble in it a little bit, but the FFRDCs like RAND and MITRE and so do a lot of work in there, but not on the university side. So the opportunity to stand this organization up and was too irresistible to pass up. So I've been doing that for 4 years plus now, and we've been doing reports, studies, analyses, events around the kind of the broad range of issues such as you outlined, emerging tech, acquisition, and across the government space, not just defense. And it's been a lot of fun. And, Eric has been, by far our best hire, and he's joined us. He's been with us 3+ years now, and been leading a lot of our efforts.
Excellent. So, Eric, over to you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to your current position.
Sure. So I was doing a number of cost estimates, things like that. And I kind of got a feeling, while I was in the Pentagon, I was like, well, here I am, costing out the F-35. I don't know how to build an F-35, right? Um, I didn't. So I was like, okay, well, I'm working with this data, but what does it mean? And we were doing one of the things that we were doing was actually inflation. And so, like, we would look at the past history of fighter inflation, and it would tend to outpace regular inflation by like 2x, right? So if we assume that we adjust for history using these higher than normal escalation rates, and then we project into the future that things will grow faster than inflation, won't that just create some structural problems? So I actually wrote the original kind of inflation and escalation handbook for cost analysis in the Pentagon, that advised that we do this because it's the most realistic thing, right? If we've had these problems in the past, shouldn't we have them in the future? And if we use these types of escalation rates on the F-35 in 2002 when it was baseline, you'd have 0% cost growth today. So it was a great program. Maybe we were just looking at it wrong. And I thought this was a little bit dangerous and a little bit awkward. And I didn't, as a young person in the Pentagon, I'm surrounded by very, very smart people, but it just seemed like something was off. So I just had to go into the history of it because that's kind of my background, economics and history. How do we apply history and market economics to this non-market sector? And so that's where I kind of stumbled upon this idea of budget reform, the planning, programming, budgeting, execution process. And I was very interested in that in the 2010s and had been writing a book, as you kind of mentioned, while I was there. And I actually got a random, offer from, there was a professor at George Mason who got a little bit of money to do kind of like social venture. And so I was just like, hey, I'll apply to this. I want to, do this thing called PPBE reform and maybe start a blog and a podcast and do some advocacy. And so he got me out of the Pentagon. I left my job there. And then luckily, after I had a little fellowship for a year, I found Jerry, who was also at George Mason, and he brought me on kindly and was able to continue the fight and continue the work and expand that out, not just PPBE, but all these other types of things in terms of contracting requirements and the whole big A acquisition process. And here we are today.
Yeah, and of course, PPBE reform is a very, very timely subject these days.
Yeah, no, we were very excited to see the commission being stood up, and we've had discussions with the team, some of the commissioners in one of their open mic sessions, and love the work that we're doing. But one of the things we did recently, we did a report, last fall, which came out where we looked at some of what can we do now, even without PPB reform. And that's that was our Bridging the Valley of Death report, which kind of looked at, things that we can do now to help address some of the challenges that, are manifested in the current system.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so now with that context, tell us a little bit about your center, the Center for Government Contracting. Maybe recent projects that you've been working on and working with.
Yeah. Like we started in 2019 is when we officially kicked off, and and the whole idea was for our center to be a nexus for government, industry, and academia to address the business, policy, regulatory issues facing the overall community, government and industry, defense, non-defense. And the like, and it's been, and we do that through 3 lines of effort. We do that through research, like reports that we've done and white papers, and then we do education and training. We do some. I teach an MBA elective around the strategy and business issues in government contracting. We do some executive education for government and industry. And then we do collaboration. We do outreach and events. We have an annual conference. Last year we had 3 undersecretaries, current and former, and that we do that. Our principal way that we do things is we do a lot of studies and analyses, and we do that through internal funds. And as you mentioned, we were fortunate to get a number of government studies in the last couple of years around defense finance, TINA, as well as intellectual property and other transactions authority. So we've been executing on those, and the majority are done. But we've got some other things that are coming in the pipeline, and they're mostly, they've been on IP and finance issues, but we're also looking to get into the budget reform as well as analysis of mergers and acquisitions, the impact on consolidation on the defense industrial base. So those are kind of issues we've done to date. But we're also spreading out. We did one last year around NASA, the future of NASA and civil space. We did one on the FAPASA authority, which is on, essentially using executive orders for acquisition policy, which goes well beyond defense issues. So we're kind of we're trying to expand beyond just defense. But those are some of the topics we've been working on.
Very good. I love the fact, by the way, that you're bringing academic scholarship to bear on this issue. I think that puts you in a very unique space. I think that's a great.
And it's been really receptive, because the government has been very interested in, and as well as industry, because they like that the neutral convening authority, the independent perspective. We've purposely stayed a little bit away from the pure academic kind of peer-reviewed research, because that's really good, but a lot of that, as you probably well know, Mark, is long in the gestation period, and we're focusing on trying to impact, government and industry through policy recommendations, and we do that principally through white papers and reports that are digestible to staffers on the Hill and the like, but have that academic perspective where we're not kind of, we're not in one partisan camp or another, and it's been a real fun ride.
We have a very, very similar philosophy to ETI, that we'd rather do the short and sweet white paper that we know is going to be read, is going to have impact. So yeah, totally resonant. Hey, so Eric, tell us a little bit about your role at the Center for Government Contracting, what including maybe some recent projects.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm kind of all over the place in terms of my role over there, but I have been leading a couple of lines of effort for defense pricing and contracting, including cost accounting as a barrier to entry, and the Truth in Negotiations Act. So we're looking at examining alternatives to certify cost or pricing data. And so that was actually a much larger report. This was part of what Jerry was talking about, like the broader finance studies that included industrial base, health, small business, and the like. And so we just kind of finished up those reports late last year. So really excited to get those over, and hopefully some of those will be made public, and we'll be able to share some of that information as well. But yeah, I've been also working with the PPBE Commission a little bit. Jerry and I were invited out there to speak with them, and I've been back delivering them some data. So I've been putting together a bunch of the reprogramming data in these quote unquote DD 1416s. And these are the same things that have basically been sitting around since the 1960s, still in these PDF and Excel documents. So I'm just trying to build a database out of them as well.
Actually, probably they're PDF and not just hard copy in some cases.
Luckily they are in Excel, but they're such in a non-standard Excel format. And we're lucky enough that, Comptroller actually gives us the R1 and the P1 docs, in an Excel, but still all that stuff, you have 30,000, just in the investments accounts for the budget, there's 30,000 pieces of paper that get sent over every year just for investment. And they're across 48 different volumes. Right. And this is where all of the program activities. So going back to the F-35, for example, if you look at a selected acquisition report, there's actually 50 program elements that the F-35 has taken from just in the investment accounts. And just imagine trying to find all of those program elements and then put them all together and try to understand the program narrative and what's really going on. So that's part of this effort as well. But one of the other, so of course there's budget reform. There's there is the kind of pricing and cost analysis aspect of what I've been doing. And then another aspect that Jerry and I are really kind of moving into is this idea of, I think, what we might be calling industrial deterrence, but industrial mobilization and surge capacity. So understanding how was that done in the World War II and the Korean War eras, where we really did have this idea of how we get things in quantity quickly to the field. And we've lost a little bit of that. And I think, with this generation of great power competition coming back, it's going to be one of the challenges of our time. And one of the things that we not just in industry or in academia, but folks like you, Mark, at NDIA and the industry associations and within government, and then the broader commercial and capital markets are really going to be needing to look into. And so that's another element. And then, yeah, so there's several lines of effort, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I always like to quote Hap Arnold, one of the fathers of the U.S. Air Force, said World War One was won on brute force. World War II was won on logistics. And you're right, harnessing the power of U.S. industry. So do I understand you get students involved in your projects?
We do. We get them involved principally as graduate research assistants. So we have one. We have one now, and a couple others we're looking to bring on board. But what we generally use a lot are our faculty, actually. So, like for a lot of the studies we did on defense pricing and contracting office, we had faculty experts, subject matter experts that helped our research teams because when they're the ones that really know commercial accounting. They're the ones that know defense, that know finance or operations management on the academic literature. So we found a nice synergy where we bring our research team together with faculty and student research assistants to go after some of these problems.
Interesting, very interesting. Hey, so I want to dive in a little bit on. We talk a lot about the need for reform. Obviously, the commission is operating this morning, but I want to start on positive note. Are there any bright spots? Are there any areas where the DoD acquisition system today excels? And are there processes that we should protect?
I think a couple of things are very positive. I think number one is they sort of have gotten the innovation message, right? There's a real broad recognition and a multiple amount of efforts. There's like how do we bring commercial tech into to address DoD problems. So you've got all these outposts. DIU is the biggest one, and AFWorks and SoftWorks all over the department that are looking to do prototyping efforts. And so they've gotten that, but there's downsides to that, because if you look at the overall, we compare that to the overall amount spent on RDT&E or procurement. It's infinitesimal. And then it's also not, the scales up there, and the transition. So the challenge of transitioning these kind of prototypes is a bit of challenge. But I think they've gotten that message, and they're trying to rapidly kind of acquire things. And then they also are using the authorities to use different kind of acquisition authorities, such as other transactions authorities or commercial solutions openings. That are really kind of trying to unlock capabilities faster. So I think, that's on the positive. Eric, do you want to add?
Sure. Yeah. And I think software is another one that is pretty positive. We have the software acquisition pathway. There's the budget activity 8, the colorless money. So you could do continuous development and deployment. So you're not stovepiped into research and development, procurement, and operations and maintenance. Software is really going to break down those stovepipes. And then you also see Deputy Secretary Kathleen Hicks had a continuous ATO, or authority to operate, kind of memo come out. And we're seeing the birth and the growth of these software factories. So Kessel Run in the Air Force, it was pretty irregular for a time. Now it's becoming pretty institutionalized and is really delivering great capability to Air Combat Command. And then you're starting to see these replicate across the services. So you have Army software factory, and then you also have in the Navy places like the Forge that are really able to start doing this continuous deployment of software using containers and the like. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of get a lot more synergies across a DoD acquisition in that respect. Now, another part, as Jerry was saying, is pretty bright that of course, we don't like the higher interest rates necessarily, and it kind of had a downturn in the broader market. But here, with the rise of Ukraine, coronavirus, and then the change in the interest rate regime, we're starting to see private capital much more interested in defense technology and companies. And company founders are really starting to consider this space very differently. And we're also seeing the large traditional firms, embracing this in a way as well. You've seen Lockheed Martin, for example, they've really ramped up their kind of venture capital arm, and they made a very large, investment in Terran, which is a space company. And so I think there's a lot of good things kind of coming through, through adversity. They see the Department of Defense potentially as growing, but potentially as a place of stability and an early adopter customer. And it really is, what we've seen since the 2016 timeframe. There's this huge burst of prototyping, right? And if you look at the budget activity 6.4 prototyping account in research, development, test, and evaluation, that really grew, since the mid 2015s, pretty large. But the problem potentially is that we're seeing, historically, it used to be, during the Reagan era buildup, it was like 73% of investment account was procurement and 27% was RDT&E. So we're really like fielding things at scale. That's how we got to the 600 ship Navy. But now we've been seeing this burst of RDT&E. And so now it's something closer to like 56% is procurement and 44% or more is RDT&E. So we're almost at this 1-to-1 parity. And as these things that the department has been investing in terms of prototypes start to reach maturity, they need to start getting into procurement. And I would love to see, procurement really grow, because there's plenty of capital from the private sector and from industry and IRAD in the large traditional primes. They're doing a lot of great work, right? It's, will these things transition and get into procurement and be fielded rapidly at scale, because we're losing time in this race against China.
You've hit on a theme that is near and dear to my heart. The whole idea of the, especially the services, organize, train, and equip, being prepared to place bets once prototypes are proven out. And I can tell you, it was a concern when I was in the building that we didn't see those bets being placed. That, the what if it actually works? So yeah, by all means, I of private investment too, because that's something also that we've certainly seen here at NDIA, and you see this these private investors, sometimes private individuals stepping up, and frankly, in many cases, it's just a sense of patriotism. I mean, they're seeing a problem, they want to support national defense, and it's just they're just being patriotic Americans and in deciding where to place their dollars. So with that in mind, we spent a lot of time at ETI talking about innovation and is the DOD innovative enough? And we've devoted some podcasts. In fact, a recent podcast that we did with Dr. Bill Bonvillian from MIT was talking about industrial innovation policy. Give me your take. How well does the DOD innovate in science and technology? And are there places that it can improve?
I mean, I kind of inclined towards, I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Mike Brown or somebody else. I mean, I don't think DOD doesn't have an innovation problem. They got an innovation adoption problem, right? So I think right now we're seeing a lot of, efforts to bring new tech in. It's just like, how do we transition it is the real challenge, who's going to catch it? Do you have the issue that you mentioned, like, who's going to be the receptor in the services? Because they're the ones that organize, train, and equip. So that is an area, but I have actually a positive anecdote on that, if you don't mind me. So one of the white papers we did last year, because I wanted to test this, I wanted to look at a use case on, you did a lot of work on artificial intelligence when you were in the building, and I wanted to look at one of these use cases to see, is this just a buzzword or is it something that is being adopted, right? So I took the issue of predictive maintenance, right, which is a topic that was done heavily by DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, and by what's now the CDAO, the former Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, Jake. They did several prototypes in 2017, 18, 19, even in 20 on predictive maintenance. And they had some companies won some contracts to do that. And then they delivered those to the services, to the Air Force and to the Army. And my question was, are these actually being used, or is it sort of not invented here problem, that kind of thing. But I was really pleasantly surprised to see in both the Army and the Air Force, those efforts were continuing to grow. Because what happened is that, like I talked to the Army in PEO PEO aviation. I mean, they took the prototypes they got from DIU and it didn't quite work in 100% of the way, but what they did is they took that and they used it to build off of, and they've got a whole program running out of Carnegie Mellon and the AI center that the Army has there that builds off this capability. So it was really nice to see this transition into something that the services were actually using on a significant basis. So I think there's a long way to go. It wasn't kind of the scale or the speed that some of the innovative tech folks would argue for, but I was pleased to see that kind of progressing.
All right. So, how should DoD be thinking about acquisition in order to improve its ability to design or procure innovative technology? And is there a role for Congress? I'm assuming the answer is yes, but what is the role for Congress in that whole process?
Yeah, so I think I think the acquisition authorities tend to be there, right? We have the middle tier of acquisition that has come through in FY 2016. I think that was the right idea. You had the rapid prototyping and then you had the rapid fielding accounts, and those allowed you to kind of get started without all of this documentation, and even allowed you to get out of the Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System, the JCIDS requirements. So you're able to kind of move much faster through the requirements and the acquisition processes. But funding, again, kind of keeps becoming an issue, right? And there was that rapid prototyping account that was created, but now that's defunct. So there's not really like these flexible funding mechanisms, because it can take 2 or more years to get an effort into the budget process so that you can then go execute, which kind of negates some of the flexibilities that we find in middle tier of acquisition. But what we've also been seeing from Congress is the addition of more types of reporting requirements on those authorities. So, for example, on middle tier, you now have a full funding certification requirement from Comptroller. And then you also have from DOT, the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, another certificate for certification of the test plan. And yet these are types of, especially on tests and evaluation, that's not even required ahead of time for a lot of large programs. And so a lot of program managers are kind of saying, well, middle tier is actually losing a lot of its value for me to a degree, right? Because I'm going to have a lot more oversight and a lot more reporting because I'm middle tier. I'm doing the new thing. So, the new guy kind of gets hammered a little bit with respect to that. But then there's also more and more reporting requirements coming in. And I think this gets back to this idea that is inherent in defense. And when we think about, what's happening in innovation, I think the labs and, DARPA doing very well. I think there's a lot of interesting things coming out of there. There's interesting things coming out of internal research and development from the primes and as well as commercial. It's just the problem becomes it's back to a waterfall life cycle plan ahead of time. So you have to create this program and then you have to have the life cycle understanding of it before you even start it. And so you get out of this agile mindset. And so in order to do that, you have to do all these plans and all these documentations, and it takes a very long time. And it's all based on a lot of opinions and judgments from many functional offices, as opposed to empirical data, because you have to start these things so early. And so there's the kind of chicken or the egg problem with some of these programs where you want to have these innovation funds so that you can get started, you can do rapid prototyping, you can then understand what the cost and life cycle implications are in terms of your product support strategy to support level of repair analyses and the like. But in order to do that, you need to already have known what the program was that was going to accept it and have the life cycle implications of that, or else there won't be a catcher's mitt, as Jerry talked about, lined up to accept these programs. And so you want to do the rapid prototyping, but you also have to have everything smoothed out and budgeted for in the long-term implications. And that's really hard thing to ask the military services to digest, right? You're going to say, okay, we want to start this idea of this prototype and maybe field it in the future. We're not sure exactly when it's going to work or that it even will work out, but you're going to have to trade off your force structure now, right? You're going to have to take away your future funding and make those trade-offs now. even though I can't guarantee you this thing's going to work. And so that's a really hard trade-off to make. And so even though the department wants this prototyping money, they sometimes don't palm for the whole thing. And there is some consternation that some of these middle tier programs weren't fully funded through the Future Years Defense Program, probably precisely for this issue, right? Because they didn't want to trade off force structure now when they didn't know that it was going to work. And so you get into this chicken or the egg problem. And that's really coming back to this whole prediction and control as opposed to agile and learn kind of mentality.
No, that makes perfect sense. We've often said that you see a promising new technology for the first time, and you want to adopt it, and you realize that what you really needed to do was go back in time 2 years and palm for it and have the money ready. So what we really need to do is invent time travel in order to make this whole system work. So no, that's excellent points. So all right, let's talk about defining success. How do we define success in this realm? What metrics should we use, and what could we lose from reducing duplication and the colors of money?
Well, I would say defining success, we've had this kind of universal metric, right? It's called cost, schedule, technical. You find it in your acquisition program baseline, right? So you define exactly what you need to do, and then you have a cost and schedule out. And then you're really kind of measured back based on that cost and schedule. So you have your acquisition program unit cost. If you breach that, or the program acquisition unit cost, you get a Nunn-McCurdy breach. So it's all about cost growth. It's these back to financial metrics. But that was one way that we can kind of have a universal metric across all these different programs. You have ships, you have satellites, you have ground vehicles. I can all use my APB and measure them in the same way. But I think what the metrics for success really need to go to is kind of more contextual based, right? Where you have kind of living things that are what I might be calling capability over time curves, right? So it's not that you have one objective and threshold value for something that's specific. It's you might have many different metrics, because Goodhart's law says anytime a metric becomes a target, it's no longer good as a metric because they over optimize on it. And then you're probably not going to get the thing at the end that you really wanted. So how do we kind of measure things over time? Like if you're doing waypoint navigation for AI or an autonomy program, well, how far can it go today? And then how quickly are we learning? For autonomous USVs, unmanned surface vessels, okay, maybe the requirement is 750 hours without touching the engine. Maybe we're at 300 or 500 now. How quickly are we learning across, are we improving that so that when we do get to the requirement, we are able to already integrated the mission modules and maybe even, some kinetic effects, so that it's all coming together at a much faster rate and we can get it into the field without having to wait for everything to be perfect. And then we can build our program. And now we're waiting another 5 to 10 years. So I think that's a critical aspect of getting away from these universal metrics, having contextual metrics that we track over time, improvement, and then we can make those incremental decisions as to, does this keep going? Does it keep getting funding? Or should we kill it? Rather than you batch and queue them. You just make all of your decisions once at the program baseline, and then you just let it go, pretending that the threat won't change, that technology won't change, and that your requirements won't change, because we know in this dynamic world that they will.
Yeah,
excellent point. Jeremy.
Yeah, I think we could get some metrics around around the whole issue of execution flexibility. I mean, I think as you talked about, the whole time travel problem, of trying to get the budget. I mean, that's just not, but that's not. It shows the flaws of the system, right?
Yeah.
You've got to have some ability to do innovation at the speed of battle, which means you've got to be able to have a catcher's mitt, that you can do these rapid innovation prototypes, and then you've got to be able to have some flexibility to get those into production. So we talk about this in our Bridge the Valley of Death report. They're moving towards portfolio consolidations and some program elements. That kind of thinking And that kind of approach, it has to happen for us to have this flexibility. You could start small with prototyping, with small kind of portfolios within the services, but that way you've got a catcher's mitt for these innovation efforts that can really test out whether or not this is works. And then because the real challenge that we found in our report, and the commission found this as well, is the poisonous relationship between Congress and the department on these kind of matters. I mean, maybe poisonous is too strong of a word, but the lack of trust, that goes both ways on this. And so, how do we build that? It's by test running these things and really kind of creating more efforts. And so measuring that is harder, but that's where I would see some success in my views, if we get moving more in that direction.
Understood. No, that makes perfect sense. We're running out of time, but before you go, I want to ask. Obviously, at NDIA, we have a keen interest in the defense industrial base, and many of our members are very concerned about what the defense industrial base should think about regarding acquisition reform. Is acquisition reform a zero-sum game? Is it a positive-sum game? What would get better for the defense industrial base if we do acquisition reform? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that that what we need to, what in my experience, both in industry and in running the industrial base office, is that you sort of get the industry that you want by what your industrial policy is your budget, essentially, right? So that if you only have a series of really big programs every once in a while, you create this zero-sum kind of situation for these competitions that lead to a lot of protests and winner-take-all kind of situations. So what I'd like to see is think about, how do we build industrial resilience by creating more opportunities for companies up and down the industrial base, because that's how we build the kind of resilience overall.
Very good. Eric, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with Jerry there. I think we've created this kind of zero-sum mentality with these big winner-take-all programs of record that take forever, and then you're just going to recap it, right? And so you kind of get into this employment and sales instability problem, whereas if you can kind of chunk those down into smaller bite-sized programs, then you might be able to have that kind of continuous competition, but also you're going to be able to streamline some of the staff. So you're really, building out technology at scale rather than having this huge compliance burden. And then that creates competition, but it's not just a zero sum. I mean, the defense budget in a respect is zero sum, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have the technologies that come from it in and out of the defense industrial base don't have commercial applications. And what we've seen is a lot of the big traditionals, they kind of firewall themselves, right? It's like, I have this business unit for government, and then maybe like Boeing will have a commercial one, but a lot of them have kind of, been kind of insulated in that respect. But I think if the Department of Defense, because they respond to the Department of Defense, so they take on the compliance mechanisms and the look and the feel of their customer. It's not necessarily the industrial base's fault. So if the customer can actually do a much better job in terms of agility and ability to be flexible in that way and look a little bit more like a commercial customer, we know that the Department of Defense will never look exactly like that because it has unique military needs. But then you might have some of these technologies being built out from the industrial base actually applying more to the commercial sector, and they might be able to grow in that respect too, right? Because we know, like Raytheon, for example, helped develop some of the technologies that led to the microwave, but they weren't necessarily able to capitalize on the microwave. Now, why was that, right? I don't think it's necessarily their fault in this respect. I think it's, the culture that comes from government. And so government really does have to take the lead here to create this kind of dynamic, competitive industrial base that makes it more of a win-win. We grow the pie as opposed to a zero-sum, fight over the pie kind of mentality.
Eric, I'm going to make that the last word. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Dr. Jerry McGinn, Eric Lofgren, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Fascinating work. The Center for Government Contracting and the School of Business at George Mason University. I encourage our listeners and our viewers to check out the work that you've been producing. Really impactful, meaningful white papers on issues that are so important to the defense industrial base. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate the conversation.
You're welcome.
Great to be with you, Mark.
Yeah.